It's always good to have Dr. Armstrong back in Illinois, had been at Illinois State, now an environmental soil scientist and associate professor in Purdue's Department of Agronomy. His research program investigates the agronomic, environmental, and economic impacts of current and emerging in-field nutrient and soil loss reduction practices within conventional and alternative cropping systems in the upper Mississippi River Basin. And what I saw, just happened to see it on social media, I think it was this past weekend, Dr. Armstrong was given a certificate of distinction at the Purdue Ag Alumni Fish Fry. And if you know Purdue Ag, if you know the Purdue Ag Fish Fry, that's a very prestigious award. So please welcome to the stage Dr. Shalamar Armstrong.
All right, thank you so much. Certainly happy to be here to share some updates on some NREC solely funded project and some projects where we leveraged NREC funds to look at other questions that we would like to answer. So I would like to start off with just looking at, what are the elements of a high-performing cover crop system, right? We can't say cover crops is new anymore. And so I've been talking to farmers. About 80% of what I do is on farmers' fields, so I take a lot of truck rides. We do a lot of talks in pole barns and field walks, and we talk about what's important to them. And initially, we all know that cover crop systems were used to basically prevent soil loss and phosphorus loss and losses of carbon, right, in surface flows. So that picture is a picture of what we see in the watershed in Towanda, in one of the largest grass waterways in the watershed. So you can see the color of that. That's a lot of loss that's happening. That's sediment, that's phosphorus, that's nitrate, and so forth. And then secondly, another element is we want to prevent nutrient loss through via tile drainage, especially central to northern portions of the state, and we could say of the Midwest. It's the same thing in Indiana. Third, we want to promote nutrient use efficiency, and I think this is where I've been focusing on for the last couple of years, really heavy, to try to figure out how to make cover crops pay for themselves at minimum, right? So farmers can adopt and not lose their shirt in the process. And so third, we do that, so you have better nutrient cycling, better nutrient availability, better transfer of nutrients from the biomass of the cover crop that scavenges nutrients, and then the release, and then the utility of that nitrogen or phosphorus by the subsequent planted cash crop. Then you can get competitive yields. All of a sudden, we may have a system that is more palatable to farmers, and they may be more willing to adopt. And so I want to start off with that preventing nutrient loss through tile drainage. And so for about 7 years now, going on 8 years, we received funding from NREC. And this is one of those sole projects where we looked at the impact of adding cover crops to a system and then measuring in the tile water the impacts or the consequences of doing so. And what we see with the black line there, you do see here, this is a non-cover crop treatment. Again, this is over about 7 years. And then this is the cover crop treatment, right? And that cover crop has dominantly been a cereal rye radish mix, but now it's purely cereal rye, and it was dominant cereal rye even in that mixture. And we see over a 7-year period, if you average the cumulative nitrogen loss via nitrate N loss via tile drainage, we see a 48% reduction, right? And so nutrient loss reduction strategy is calling for about, I think, a 30% reduction, right? And so what does that equate to? That equates to, for the non-cover crop control, a loss of about close to, let's say, 29 pounds per acre per year, relative to, for the cover crop system, only 15 pounds per acre per year, right? And this is over a 7-year period. Notice that, and I can tell you that over these years, we've had some environmental conditions that caused the cover crop to only get to about 500 pounds per acre biomass, but yet you do not see the gap between the green and the black lines closing. right? That means that cover crops is having a cumulative effect on the ability to keep nutrients in the soil, okay? Also, I want to point out is that the cover crops are maintaining this reduction in nitrate loss via tile drainage by dominantly tapping into and absorbing the legacy nitrogen that's in our high organic matter soils. The cover crop is not really interacting with fertilizer nitrogen, okay? So that was a plot scale. Let's move to the watershed scale in Towanda. Right there in central Illinois, we found two large watersheds. One at the bottom here, it's about, I would say, 1,100 acres, and then this one at the top is about 770 acres. We cover crop half of the larger watershed, and we kind of paid people not to cover crop in this watershed up north. And here are our results over about this is over a 5-year period. We see a 35% reduction when you think about the load in pounds per 1,000 gallons per day. 35% on a watershed scale, and we saw 40-something% on a plot scale. So similar results. So we can then confirm that from a plot to a uncontrolled watershed scale, where we're only getting about 50% adoption in that watershed, we're still seeing the nutrient loss reduction as it refers to nitrogen. I do want to point out that there are some dynamics here. So starting out, we think that the effect of legacy nitrogen from past practices before we cover crop was out-competing or over increasing, it was masking the ability of the cover crop. And then over time, after that system matured and after reoccurring cover cropping on the same parcels of land, we start seeing a separation of the green and black dots, green being with cover crops, black being without. And so we've seen that persist over time, over the years. So I did show you that picture, pointed out that picture of that dark black water that was leaving the watershed through a surface runoff event. And so after seeing that, we had a trail cam, and we were to look at that, and it's happening over and over. It's like, hey, I think we are missing a part of this question or the system that we really need to tap into. So we got additional funding from NREC to really dig into what we're losing on the surface, and you see results here of discharge and nitrate load, but we are also planning to analyze phosphorus. And so one of the things that stood out to us, this was one event. It was about 1.4 inches of rain, July 9th through the 12th. That's how long the drainage occurred. And so we looked at the surface in the treatment versus the non-cover crop reference watershed, and we saw the dominant portion of drainage or discharge that left that watershed, both watersheds, was surface relative to tile drainage. Now, most of us would think the opposite was true, but we actually saw about 76% of drainage occurring from surface drainage relative to only 24% from tile drain when you average across both watersheds. So then if the dominant portion of drainage is leaving is from the surface, we really need to understand what's leaving, right? And so then we looked at, so we devised a plan and implemented equipment where we can measure by flow the discharge rate and also the contents of every liter or the volume that's leaving the watershed. And we still found that dominantly the nitrogen that's being lost in this one rainfall event was dominantly from surface flow relative to subsurface flow. But then when you equate both of those and compare them against each other, we still see about a 50% reduction in nitrate loss in pounds per acre for the treatment watershed relative to the reference watershed. So we're getting some transfer, even subsurface, cover crop has an impact, surface, cover crop has an impact. And then we're planning to analyze phosphorus just as we did the nitrate load. So now let's look at, I like to say, the money question, right? Because right now we haven't really translated into a system or a market where farmers can get paid for saving nitrogen from being lost from the fields, but they are getting paid for the bushel, right? And so what's the impact of cover crops on yields? The question is can we maintain our environmental impact, 30 to 40% reduction in nitrate loss, and still produce and manage for competitive yields? That's the main question. And so dominantly in the Midwest, cereal rye is the workhorse cover crop, right? If I ask farmers that are in the room, which cover crop do you love most would raise their hand if I said cereal rye. You can plant it late, it grows. You plant it early, it grows very well. You terminate it, you can do a decent job of terminating it. But the one caveat is a negative trade-off that I normally would measure, and you've heard me say this over the years, reduced yields for corn following cereal rye. We found in my study of about 7 years, about 6 to 13% reduction. Then I said, well, it's just me. Maybe I'm a bad manager. So then I began to look across the region, my other colleagues, and then I did the math. Over 400 pairs with or without cereal rye for corn and soybean. For corn, I saw about a 7% reduction. Okay, and this is across all types of nitrogen management. There's just a lot of carbon being generated that causes some problems or nitrogen tie-up. And so we begin to dig deeper, and you've seen this before from me. We looked at whole plant above ground nitrogen uptake, and here we find that where you have corn planted into cereal rye residue, and you go all the way out from V6 to R6, you come up with about a deficit of about 60 pounds per acre that you need to deal with because the cover crop is doing its job. It's scavenging nitrogen and assimilating it into its structure, and because it has a high C/N ratio, it's releasing it at a slower pace. And so we wanted to verify that, and we got more NREC funding. They've been good to my program. And we tracked nitrogen into the cereal rye. We terminated the cereal rye, tracked it into the soil. We planted the corn and soybean, tracked it into the plant at different growth stages from V5, VT to harvest. And what we found was about 9 to 10% of what the cereal rye scavenges above ground actually gets used by the plant by harvest, right? So that's stingy. So if your cereal rye took up 40 pounds, you're only going to see 4 go into the corn. That's really stingy, right? And so, we're getting significant reductions in environmental impacts, soil health, and so forth with using cereal rye, but when it comes before corn, to really get the equal yield relative to the non-cover crop control, you have to add more nitrogen. And I'm sure others have said that before me, and we'll say it afterwards. And so this is what we're dealing with. This is a cartoon that I like to use. This black line separates what's available above and what's unavailable below to your corn crop. And so with no cover crop, most of the nitrogen is available in the soil, right? But then you don't have anything scavenging nitrogen, so you lose 28% of it through the tile draining. When you add cover crops to the system, a large portion that was in the soil is now scavenged, right, and assimilated into the cover crop structure. And then that causes a reduction in which you lose via tile drainage. That's what we see. That's what we have seen. However, we think, and we would like to think, in a perfect world, that some of this green would turn brown by the time we plant the corn and we get some of that nitrogen back. Well, we track that nitrogen and we only get about 10% back. So most of what's in this 51% now goes below the line, just like losses of nitrogen through the tile drainage. You can't use it that particular year. So that leaves us then, Brett, with about a 40 to 60 pounds per acre management challenge that we have to deal with, right? And so that brings us to what we call next generation cover crop management. And me and my colleagues who I collaborate with, we look at a myriad of different practices, that will help us to manage for this 40 to 60 pounds. And first, I'm not going to talk about it today, but in application rate and timing. Then the second is, hey, we lose the battle sometimes because we lose plant population. just right off the bat because of the interference with high residue system and our planting equipment. So we started looking at closing wheel settings and so forth to protect plant population. And then the two management practices that I am going to talk about is precision planted cover crops and also overwintering legumes, okay? And so when it comes to overwintering legumes, this is what we really want to see. This is what we are expecting. This is a preliminary study by one of my students who went out at planting in a Balanza clover, cereal rye, and a non-cover crop control, took samples down to about 5 centimeters, took it back to the lab, incubated it as we simulated the growing degree days for corn emergence all the way to R6, and you can see that the blue line is separating from the green and the red line as we increase in the season. So as you get more heat units, we get more mineralization. That's coming from that Balanza clover, which is a neat type of clover that overwinters, similarly to cereal rye, but it fixes nitrogen instead of scavenges nitrogen. And so we wanted to see if we could incorporate this into the common corn and soybean rotation and then have the cover crop actually pay for itself at minimum, okay? So we got funding, of course, from NREC, and also we leveraged that to get some SARE funding. And my collaborators here are Amir Singapore and Andrew Margonaut, who you've just heard from. And so we're doing this study across multiple states, and so I'll show you some work from Illinois and show you some work from Indiana. And so when you think about our trials, they contain, well, this one contains about 3 different factors that make up our treatments. The first is the cover crop species, right? Balanza clover versus cereal rye. Who's going to win that race as far as yield? Then we have planting method, planting conventional or precision, right? And then we have cover crop seeding, full seeding rate or a reduced, let's say by 50% seeding rate. And when you think about precision planted, I'm not the first to do this. Amir and John Pike was working on this. We came together and we began to do things together. And so basically the idea is to plant cereal rye or your cover crop in strips across the field and then leave space on 30-inch spacing, right, for your corn to be planted with RTK guidance in between the residue of the cover crops. The idea is to get a non-competitive growing zone between cover crops and cash crops, which could reduce your seeding rate. It could reduce your antagonistic relationship between carbon and nitrogen and reduce your nitrogen penalty. It could also increase your soil tilt in that corn growing zone. In other words, it warms up faster, less moisture there, you can plant faster, almost like tilling without tilling, okay? And we treated each system separately. And so one of the things that I did learn with Balanza clover is that you gotta be patient. And so this is at Joe Ruthermill's farm in Champaign County, and this is what it looks like. It's kind of like a timeline of the Balanza clover growth over time. So in December, don't even go out there in December. It's not gonna show you anything. You're not gonna see anything but corn residue, right? You really wanna go out to see if you got something in April. That's when it really starts to grow. You can see from April 9th to April 29th, 20 days, this is the difference in growth, right? Pretty significant. So you gotta be patient in the month of April. And this system could start with a early maturing soybean that you can harvest early, get decent yield, and then come and plant same day your Balanza clover, and you can get decent growth possibly in central Illinois. We did 1 out of 2 years, and we're doing some things behind wheat to try to increase that. What's in the biomass? Well, how much biomass do we have? And what we found was, for the Balanza clover in central Illinois, we get about, let's say, 1,000 kilograms per hectare of biomass. It didn't matter if it was reduced rate or not. It didn't matter if it was conventional planted or precision planted. We got the same biomass, and that was the case also for cereal rye. That gave us an average of about, let's say, 2,800 kilograms per hectare. Treatment factors did not matter. You got the same biomass. So therefore, you got the same nitrogen uptake. Okay, for Balanza clover across all treatments, we got about an average of 35 kilograms per hectare in the biomass. And for cereal rye, we got an average of about maybe 55 kilograms per hectare. But So the moral of this story so far is that you can plant 50 to 75% less seed and get the same production and get the same performance. So most people may be sleeping on that, but most farmers who are in the room, they're saying, hey, I can increase my profit margin because I can put less inputs of seed, right? And so you can cut back on the seed and get the same production. Here's one important thing, Balanza clover versus cereal rye. You're getting half the seed-in ratio. So your material for Balanza clover, resulted in about a seed-in ratio of 10 versus cereal rye somewhere 18 to 17. 17, your seed-in ratio is about 18 to 17. Now, seed-in ratio is an indicator of how fast the microbiome processes your residue and then releases nutrients into an available pool so that your plant can grab it and use it. Your corn can grab it and use it. So this is what it kind of looks like on May 14th in Central Illinois. Decent stand, and you can see the strips that were maintained. You couldn't see it at first because the Balanza clover had canopy, but once the tractor goes through with RTK guidance, we're seeing that the strips were maintained. The yield was all over the place in this field. We had some trouble. We had stink bugs. We also had voles, right? But one thing that I want to point out, and then I'll move, is that here is the non-cover crop control with the highest yield in the field, okay? And here's where we would be normally, conventionally. So that difference is what we normally would see when we come in with cereal rye before corn. This is with starter. This is with all of the management that you could, put in that field to try to make things equal. We still was significantly different, significantly lower yield with conventional cereal rye full rate, right? And so when we, with the exception of 2 Balanza clover treatments, we basically were not significantly different statistically from the control when Balanza clover was used in the treatment. And so I would say that we're starting to, this is my first indication that we're kind of closing that yield gap by just simply selecting the right cover crop before corn, something that scavenges versus something that fixes nitrogen, right? A legume versus a grass. The legume fares better, okay? So here's another treatment, another experiment that we performed. Again, we're trying to see if Balanza clover can replace cereal rye before corn. We have cover crop selection, planting method, and then N rates that goes from 0 to 250 pounds per acre, okay? Again, now, in southern Indiana, that growth looks drastically different relative to central Illinois. So where you're located is going to dictate the performance of that clover, okay? And you can see here again, still in April, you're getting most of your growth and performance from that clover. All right, this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like on May 15th, okay, of 2021. That's decent growth, okay? Anybody want to take a guess how much biomass that is, pounds per acre? A lot. That's about right. How much nitrogen is in this biomass? Less than 100 pounds or more than 100 pounds? More. More than 200 pounds or less? Less. You might have saw this presentation before. So this is what it looks like, right? And this is averaged over 21 and 22, and this is in southern Indiana. Remember the biomass in central Illinois? It was less than 1,200 kilograms per hectare. And so here we have, on average for Balanza clover, 4,780 pounds per acre of above ground. This is an underestimate because we're not measuring the roots like Andrew will, right? And so for cereal rye, it's about 2,567 pounds per acre on average across the 2 years. Look at the nitrogen. 137 pounds on average is in the above ground biomass of nitrogen relative to only 53 for cereal rye, okay? C/N ratio for, that type of biomass, the C/N ratio is like 12 on average. That's really good versus 21 for the cereal rye. So you can see the dynamics, right? But then this is what we learned, that depending on how we manage the biomass, it affects the utility of the nitrogen in the biomass. So one on the left in 21, we planted green. On the right, we planted brown green. It made a difference. It made a significant difference, and I'm going to show you. So in 2021, and this was very interesting. We applied 0 nitrogen, and here the cereali plots, right? Cereali treatments, and then here's Balanza clover, these two, and then the control, which is red, and they're not significantly different from Balanza clover. So right here, with nothing applied, you can see that nitrogen transfer occurring, where it didn't occur for the cereali, but it did occur very well for the Balanza clover. Okay, that advantage stayed there up until about 100 pounds per acre being added. So these three were significantly different from the cereali. We started the MRTN for the non-cover crop control, and the Balanza clover treatments was about 150 pounds per acre, and we never plateaued well enough to determine that for cereali. Okay? Now, you wonder, with 137 pounds per acre of nitrogen and above ground biomass, why didn't we get separation? Well, I would say because we started the decomp cycle too slowly. We should have started it earlier. We started it too late. So we planted and started the decomp cycle at the same time because we planted green, right? And this is the result. We left a lot in the field. My grandmother would say we left a lot of meat on the bone, right? We left a lot there. You can see this is at harvest in 21, right? How much nitrogen is there that should be in the corn? So that's why we didn't get the separation. We also had trouble with our population. We had 26% less harvestable ears where we planted corn into that high residue. That's significant, right? The only way that we were able to make up the difference between the non-cover crop control and the Balanza clover is that the actual kernel weight was significantly higher for the Balanza control relative to the control. That's the only way it made the difference. So then we thought to ourselves, in 2021, the next year, lessons learned, we're going to start the decomp cycle early and plant brown green rather than plant green, still get the kernel weight, and see if we can separate and get significantly different yield for Balanza clover that has the nitrogen fixed over 130 pounds per acre. And lo and behold, we did it, right? We were able to accomplish that in 22. We planted brown rather than green. And so first I want to point out is that there is some separation between conventional planted versus precision planted. Precision was better and not significantly different from the control. Whereas conventional planted, like we would normally do it, it yet lagged behind. Okay? We saw a significant difference between Balanza clover and all other treatments up until we got to 100 pounds per acre. Above that, that difference went away. But we got an MRTN again for Balanza clover at about 150 pounds per acre of nitrogen added. For the non-cover crop control and the precision planted cereali, that was 200 pounds. That's a 50-pound difference. That's significant. And then for the MRTN for the conventionally planted cereali, like we normally would do it, was actually 250 pounds. That's 100 pounds different, right? So let's do a little math, and I'm not an ag economist, right? And if one is in the room want to work with me, great. Let's talk afterwards. You think about $3 or so for Balanza clover, $3 per pound of Balanza clover. Let's say we plant at 3 pounds per acre. That's about $9 per acre so far. We got to terminate it. Glyphosate 2,4-D. Let's say $10 per acre, right? You add that together. Let's just say $20 per acre. $20 per acre to manage that Balanza clover, planting and terminating. We just at the same yield, we got a difference of about 50 pounds between the non-cover crop control and the Balanza clover. Anybody doing math like me? So the cover crop has paid for itself, in this case, in this year, and also netted you about $30 per acre, because it only took about $20 per acre to manage it, right? So this is the potential. This is where we could go. We have to be more creative as we move north in the Midwest, right? But if we can get wheat to come on, again, very strongly, we can plant behind wheat, we can get this biomass, and we can manage the biomass on the back end and try to get a nitrogen credit, which reduces our input costs, and possibly, first of all, we just want to get a system where the cover crop pays for itself. That's high performing. And then after that, we want to see greater yields at lower end rates. Then it could possibly also add some lanyard. That's Louisiana for extra. Okay? Here's a summary. You can plant the cover crop at 50% lower seeding rate and still get the same performance. As far as Balanza clover, we saw over a 2-year period 137 pounds per acre of nitrogen within the above ground biomass only, which could function as an end credit if or depending on how we manage in the spring that high biomass when we plant. I recommend that we plant brown green. Give it some time, get your decomp started, get your microbes excited, then plant. Instead of planting green, which then causes your decomp, your release of nitrogen to be desynchronized from your corn demand for nitrogen. So the corn is looking for it, but we're not releasing it fast enough, right? Balanza clover MRTM was about 150 pounds per acre, which was 100 pounds per acre less relative to cereal plots in both years, and then 50 pounds less relative to the non-cover crop control in 1 of 2 years. I do think that Balanza clover could be a viable overwintering cover crop to be an alternative to cereal before corn. So we're trading for species that fix nitrogen from the atmosphere so we can grow nitrogen rather than scavenge nitrogen and possibly get an end credit and the cover crop pay for itself plus. So I'll stop there, and if we have any questions, I will entertain those.
Donna has a question in the back.
Any advice on how to control slugs and voles? Continually just fighting one or the other, and sometimes both of them. Any experience in different cover crops, different timing, different anything? Because I really get frustrated, and my landlord see these big holes out there in the field, and like, we're not doing this again. So
Yeah.
Since we're recording, go ahead and use the microphone.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, I can try. I'm gonna go to the voles, right? So if there are entomologists in the room, you can speak to the slugs. But with the voles, incidentally, we had at one of our Purdue farms, they do like every 2 weeks they do flights with a drone, and they sent me the flights, and then they overlay the treatments. And I found that where we had these spaces, like the precision planted, there was less vole pressure relative when we had everything covered with the conventional planted. And I began to talk to a wildlife biologist, and he simply said, hey, when you plant precision, you allow the hawks and the aerial predators to be able to see into your canopy. But when everything is covered and you have 100% canopy cover, they can't see, so they can't attack and they can't hunt. And so then the population then builds up. So that's the only thing that I can offer to you. I have not specifically studied voles and slugs as it pertains to either cereal or Balanza clover. But the more that the aerial predators can see the surface, the better. The less vole pressure we've seen. And that was just incidental between drone flights and overlay of the plots for 1 year where we had really bad, I think it was 21, we had really bad vole pressure.
Another one right down here.
Shalamar.
Okay, oh my God, Dan, don't ask me a question.
So you've got a lot of background data or baseline data on those those paired watersheds.
Yeah.
Have you thought about flipping them and seeing how fast you can change the other watershed as far as nitrate loss, and then see how long it takes the other watershed to revert back to where it was when it started?
Yeah, that's been a thought, and we haven't gone in that direction yet because we have a couple more things with surface flow to try to figure out first. I want to see if the cover crops are reducing the phosphorus loss to that big waterway, and both, it's neat because both watersheds have a huge waterway that transport about 90% of the surface water, and we have one with and without cover crops. We want to see that first, and then the next thing we want to do is to see if we can do targeted cover crop adoption in the watershed, and then get the same results as nitrate reduction. So in other words, use my friend Rabin to use SWOT, and then to determine, based on the inherent soil properties, what parcels of land in the watershed has the greatest susceptibility to nitrate loss, and then come in and cover crop in patches, right? Those different HRUs, and then determine at the end nitrate loss. And then after that, I think we'll think about, if Julie lets me, we'll flip. We'll flip the watersheds and then see what happens. Does one revert that has been long-term reducing nitrate loss, and does one correct for nitrate loss because of the addition of the cover crops?
So looking forward to see if you can make the correction within a year, if we can change the nitrate loss as well.
Yeah.
Then my other question is, on the Balanza clover,
Yeah.
was there surface loss of nitrogen, and also nitrogen that was left over after the corn crop, did it increase tile nitrate flow?
That's a very good question. And so we just got funding to look at that in detail. And we don't have any data on that just yet, other than what Laura Gentry showed, where you had soybeans and then you had a flush. And so I suspect that we may have a trade-off that we need to consider. But what I like to do is to study a pure stand of cover crops, and then I mix it according to how it performs. So if I see we have a flush of nitrogen and it's offsetting our environmental impact that we've had prior to including it, then we will mix it with cereal rye, but then we will control that mix by the C/N ratio, right? And that way we can get the best of both worlds. Thank you.